Joining us now live, Carly Fiorina. She ran for president. She ran for Senate. She's not running for Senate in Virginia, but she's involved in a lot of nonprofits and still speaking out on the issues. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. Carly Fiorina, great to have you with us.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you again.
Oh, I don't know where to start. Let's start with this is like I got so much to ask you. I want you to weigh in on. It's going to be like potpourri, no particular order. Let's start with, well, you're kind of familiar with this being with Hewlett-Packard, but let's start with the airplane company in Washington State, that is, Boeing. The president saying the Trump administration going to cancel the Boeing deal with an Iranian airline supplying them airlines. And the Trump administration taking the position that, well, wait a minute, Boeing, yeah, we want the jobs, but they're going to sell these planes to the Iranian government. These are big jet planes, and then they're going to utilize them to ship Iranian fighters to other parts of the world to kill Americans. That doesn't make any sense, so they want to cancel the deal. What say you?
Well, this was always the danger in the Iranian deal, that, Obama at the time said, well, we can, remember the phrase, snap back sanctions?
Right. That's right.
Which was always
I forgot about that. Snap back.
Misleading, because as soon as commercial business started to flow, and it started immediately, European companies piled in, as well as some American companies. Boeing is competing with Airbus. Airbus wants that business as badly as Boeing does. So as soon as commercial business started to flow, the thing got much, much, much more complicated. And it's why signing the deal in the first place was such a bad decision. I understand Trump's point of view. I understand the administration's point of view. I also know that Boeing is trying to compete with the business against its European counterparts. And this is why I think the entire Iranian deal needs to be relooked at. But crucially, it's going to have to get relooked at realistically in conjunction with our European partners, because there's so much business involved here. And what a Boeing is probably saying to the administration is this: look, do you want European companies to reap all the benefits from this deal and American companies to be shut out of the jobs? That's a compelling argument as well. So the commercial business was always the big problem here. The second those sanctions were lifted, people rushed in to make money. Yes, Iran is a sponsor of terrorism, which is why the deal shouldn't have been signed. Yes, they are hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon, which is why the deal shouldn't have been signed. But yes, there is a lot of commercial business at stake here. Iran is a huge country.
Okay, that's a pretty sober analysis of the situation. So it sounds like you're saying that, look, whatever happened with Obama happened, and he did have it. And I can't believe you brought up the snapback thing, which, when he said it, like, it's one of those things that sounds great in defending a deal, but like you said, it could never work because of
totally
the
unrealistic
commercial interest. Totally unrealistic. But it sounds like what you're saying, that the Trump administration right now, kind of their hands are tied, right? They have to nix this deal.
Well, what I'm saying is that unilateral action here, which is what the Trump administration seems to be favoring at the moment, unilateral action won't solve the problem. If the Trump administration unilaterally says we're getting out of the deal, then American companies will be harmed over European companies. If the Trump administration says unilaterally we're going to do a bunch of things and the Europeans don't agree, which they currently don't, nothing will change. And the Iranians will use that split between us and our allies against us. They're smart too. So what I'm saying is, my own view is sometimes less talk is better. I think what we ought to be doing very quietly behind the scenes without saying anything to anybody is getting with our European counterparts and saying, look, we have to acknowledge that just carrying on with this agreement as if nothing is happening is foolish. That takes time. It's going to take a lot of quiet, hard work, not noisy posturing. But in the end, commercial interests have always been the thing that complicated this. I said it at the time, and I'll say it again now. There's a lot of money to be made here, and money always makes things tough.
No question about that. We see we're just following the money here in D.C., and it all leads back to donors and people getting reelected. And saying one thing to their constituents and then doing something else when the
and
lobbyists in the
business interests that are
$5,000
lobbying,
suit show up.
as you know, sitting there in the swamp.
And it's unbelievable. I mean, you know what? You can talk about it, but to come up here every day and to go in it, to wade in it and just see what happens, Carly, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's worse than you thought. And I think what happens is you get up here and you stay a while and then you become callous to the whole thing, and it's kind of the way it is.
Well,
and
that's
so
right. It's the system preserving itself, feeding on itself. John, in this season of hopefully tax reform and tax cuts, I'll just remind you of something. When I was running for president, but for years, I've been saying the key here is the tax code has to be simplified. The 76,000-page tax code favors these big companies. It favors the wealthy. It favors the entrenched. It favors the powerful. Because the big companies, the entrenched, the powerful, the wealthy, have the resources to navigate all that complexity. Nobody else does. And so the way the tax code is put together, that 76,000 pages, all this complexity and arcane regulation, the big prosper in that. That's the dirty little secret. And so if you want to level the playing field between big companies and small companies, if you want to level the playing field between, Joe Q. Public and a wealthy individual in New York, the only way to do that is to simplify the swamp. Simplify the tax code, not 76,000 pages, more like 3 or 4. I'd even take 10 or 20. Simplify the regulatory regime so that it's transparent and obvious to everybody. Until we do that, and move money and power out of D.C., the swamp will continue. The system will preserve itself.
The system will preserve itself. That's exactly it, and you're right. I mean, the 76,000 pages, it can only be taken advantage by the swamp and the elites, right? Because average people have no idea what it is, right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, only the wealthy, the well-connected, the powerful, the big can hire the accountants, the lawyers, and the lobbyists to make the system work for them. So while we're talking about tax cuts, and boy, I hope we get tax reform done, as you and I talked about the last time we chatted,
right.
We have to get this done, but simplification is key. And if Republicans don't stand for, if conservatives don't stand for simplification and leveling the playing field, then I don't know what we stand for.
Well, they're not. Even yesterday, one little thing leaks out and everybody goes crazy about 401ks, and the president's got to get involved and tweet something out. I mean, look, every time something leaks out that threatens the perpetuation of the swamp creatures, as you know, the lobbyists are going to come out. Everybody's going to go crazy over it because they want to preserve whatever it is that they want to preserve for their select few that are paying a lot of money for this.
That's exactly right. My dad was a professor of tax law. He eventually became a federal judge. But I can remember being a little girl, and even long until I was college, saying, Daddy, why do you study tax law? It's so boring. It's so arcane. And I'll never forget what he said to me every time. Carly, the tax code is how the government exercises power. And boy, is that true. Boy, is that true.
Wow. I got to type that in. Carly, let's get to troops in Niger. And why are they there? And why don't we have a new debate on an authorization of military force in this country? Both leaders of both parties keep deep sixing it because they don't want their people to go on the record in Congress. Their number one job is to take votes. And now we're trying to blame Trump. Well, we can blame Trump or Obama, but isn't it the responsibility of Congress to exercise their authority and say, look, we're operating on an AUMF that was enacted 3 administrations ago, 4 wars ago, almost 3 decades ago. We need to go to the floor, have a debate, and decide, why are we sending troops all over the globe?
Well, I agree with that, and I also think it's a little rich for all these senators and congressmen to say, I didn't know. I think what they're saying is, I didn't know the specific number in Niger, 1,000 troops in Niger. But the truth is, the Africa Command was stood up almost, if not a little over, 10 years ago. A command was stood up. And the Africa Command got a lot of discussion between the Pentagon, between the administration, between the House and the Senate and the State Department. The Africa Command was stood up, among other reasons, because Africa, the continent of Africa, is home to a lot of terrorist organizations. I mean, the terrorist bombing in Somalia that just happened, Boko Haram. I mean, terrorists are all throughout Africa, and many of them have become loosely affiliated or closely affiliated with ISIS. Boko Haram relatively recently pledged allegiance to ISIS. The terrorist groups in Somalia have done the same. I mean, my goodness, almost 300 people were just killed in a bombing attack in Somalia. So terrorists are there, the Africa Command is there, and we have had troops there for at least a decade. Now, when someone dies, everything is different, obviously. And I'm sure it is perhaps true that people didn't know the specifics of 1,000 troops in Niger, but the Africa Command is not new, nor is terrorist activity in Africa new. What is new is we just had 4 brave Americans killed. And what's also new is that people don't really understand what happened here. And in particular, people don't understand, it's a little bit like the terrible situation with Black Hawk Down many, many years ago. People don't understand how a routine mission turned into a firefight that killed 4. People don't understand how one of our Special Forces operators went missing for 2 days. There's a lot of mystery here, and all of that needs to be answered, and that can create an opportunity for another debate.
Well, it's a debate that we absolutely have to have. Carly, I want to shift gears for a minute. The uranium deal through the Russians. In the Wall Street Journal today, it's saying that the FBI gathered substantial evidence that Russian nuclear industry officials were engaged in bribery, kickbacks, extortion, and money laundering designed to grow Putin's atomic energy business inside the United States. We also know now that Hillary Clinton sat on the board of advisors that approved the deal, and as it was being approved, Bill Clinton got $500,000 in speaking fees through Russian banks right after that. They got $250,000 donated to the Clinton Foundation while Hillary was on the advisory board approving this stuff. We also now know that we have a FBI informant that was wired, that got all this information, that's been gagged. It never came out. It got deep-sixed. Mueller, who's doing the Trump investigation, he didn't do anything with it. To the average person looking at this, it's like, I might be a layman, but this stinks to high heaven with these Clintons and this whole deal and kickbacks and information getting suppressed during an election. What the hell's going on here?
Well, you and I talked about this right when Mueller was announced, and I said, his own self-interest, I think, will drive him to be bipartisan here. And I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, he is following the information and where it leads him. And where it leads him is right smack dab back into the middle of the Clinton Foundation and this uranium deal, which was talked about during the election. I mean, Clinton poo-pooed it, but people did talk about it. I think it helped, honestly, I think it helped defeat Hillary Clinton because it added to this general stench of corruption and lack of transparency, which people clearly believed about her. Yes, you're absolutely right. The Obama administration didn't do anything about it, and lots of people approved this deal. But let's hope we get to the bottom of this. And in the end, and you and I have been having this conversation since February at least, in the end, the most important thing here is that we actually get to the bottom, get to the whole truth about what the heck the Russians have been doing in our elections, in our country. What are they doing? And that means hacking, and it means buying companies and all the rest. Now, I'll just say, I've said for some time that we should not be permitting Russians or Chinese to buy companies in this country that they don't permit us to buy in their countries. And we've been doing that for a long time. The Chinese have bought companies, Russians have bought companies. This isn't the first case. But it may be the first case that's so clearly connected to a presidential family and a presidential candidate.
Carly, in your gut, do you think the Clintons are ever going to get held accountable for any of this stuff?
Well, I certainly hope so, and I think the chances are much higher now than they've ever been. And the reason for that, it's cynical, but it's true, is they don't have power anymore. So there were lots of people who were prepared to protect the Clintons while the Clintons had power. And let's face it, you have power when you're the Secretary of State. You have power when you're supposedly going to be the next president. They don't have a lot of power anymore. And in fact, the Democratic Party is running as fast as they can away from Hillary Clinton, which is why I think she's out there every day trying to remind people she's there. I don't think it's helping her, but she's doing it with this ridiculous book tour. The point is, yes, I think it's more likely that people will walk away from the Clintons now and let the chips fall where they may.
Great analysis. As always, Carly Fiorina, we're out of time. I really want to thank you for being with us today and sharing your thoughts. Always spot on. Hey, for more information, go to carlyfiorina.com. That's carlyfiorina.com. Plus, Carly, I've got a special message from you for your state senator, Scott Suravel, who says he'd really like to talk to you. He wants to be sure you're getting appropriate constituent service from your state senator. He wanted me to deliver that message to you personally.
Well, thanks so much for that. And just remember, we're in a neck-and-neck race, 2 weeks to go.
Who's going to win?
Who ends up in the governor's mansion, the lieutenant governor's mansion, all of our great reps is going to depend on who comes out to vote. So we all need to get out there and vote.
Is Ed going to win?
The right team here.
Is Ed going to win?
Well, I sure hope so, and it's going to depend on who comes out to vote. So as you've seen, it's neck and neck now. The Democrats are getting nervous. They're pouring money in. They've got ridiculous ads up. Yes, he can win. He must win, and if anyone who's sitting on the sidelines, just remember what happened 10 days ago. You had Trump, Pence, Gillespie all standing up, and then you had Obama, Biden, McAuliffe all standing up for Ralph Northam. That's all you need to know.
All right, Ed's going to win. Hey, thanks for being with us,
Hey,
Carly.
thanks,
it's always
John.
a
Have a
pleasure
great
to have
day.
you on.